Hey, what's up? So here is the demo. Sorry, it took a few days, but I'm gonna do a basic version of what you're asking for here in this question, which is the mood board app. You can click to upload or drag and drop files, and then they display four per row, and you can drag and drop reorder. So I'll make this, but like to keep the demo short, I won't go through every last detail and make it like everything perfect, but I'll show you most of the steps, and then feel free to ask me follow up so I can do more. But I'm just going to go through this since it's kind of a few steps. I'm going to just build it and then explain things while I build and that kind of thing. So this is a blank, totally new project. If I drop a page on here, whoops, and call it mood board, I'm going to basically make a page that it has an image uploader on the top and the mood board on the bottom. So super simple. I am going to do some quick little things to separate them and make the page look nice, which I'll explain. It's sort of outside of this demo. It could be for anything, but I'm going to drag a section onto here. And then I'm going to put a container inside of this section. And that makes like a centered column. So I'm just going to do that, and I'll put the image uploader in this top one. So I'm actually going to wrap it in a div, which is kind of like a personal preference. You don't have to do that. But I'm going to go to the elements, and I'm going to find image uploader. Put it right in that div. And then I'm going to do another section. So I'm just going to be like, whoops, that did not go in the right spot. Another section, and then another container in that section. And then in this section, which I'll do another div, I'm going to do element and then grid list of row, or grid list it's called now. And grid list, what it is that will take another page and repeat it multiple times based on a data collection or based on some kind of data. So for now, it looks blank. And you can see it says go to child page. There's no child page selected, which is up here in the grid list properties. There's a row page. So what we need to do is actually create a page that will display multiple times based on the data. And what we're trying to display here is a mood board. So it'd be like a bunch of images, 4 images across. So the page we're going to display is more or less going to be an image. So we can create that now. I'm going to create a new blank page. And this is mood board. It's really like, sometimes you would call this a card or you could call this an image. And so I'm going to drag a div container onto here just to contain it. And then I'm going to put an image element, so right here under media, inside this div. So now I have this page, which is just an image. You can think of that page as a reusable component. So that's going to be like one card on that mood board, one image on that mood board is represented by this page, and we can repeat it multiple times. And so if we go back to this grid list here, and we go to the properties of it, if we select that new page, mood board image for the row page, you can see right here, it's going to pop in. So this is showing it's repeating that row page 3 times, but we haven't set up data yet. So depending on what data we bind to this grid list element, that's how many times it'll repeat and what it'll show. But one thing is I see we don't want it to be stacked like this. We want it to be a grouping of 4. So I'm just going to do some quick and dirty CSS on this grid list. And this is somewhere where, like, depending on your layout, depending on what you want to do design-wise, you might have to do something a little different here, but this is kind of a general quick way to do it. It'll be a good start if you're just building it up. So I'm going to go. So what I did was I'm on the grid list here. I'm selected on it. We were on properties. I clicked over to the styling tab. In styling, I have a primary style class on here that comes with it. Grid list of pages rows. You would most likely in a production application replace this primary class with all your styles and make a new class. I'm just going to do edit inline. I'm just going to do inline styling. It's like a quick way. And I'm just going to add a few properties. But this is the same properties you would add to that main class if you did this right. Display, grid, column gap, space between each column, row gap, space between each row. And then in CSS Grid, there's a specific way that you do the formatting. So you do grid template columns. And if I do 1 FR, which is one fractional width, space 1 FR, space 1 FR, space 1 FR, that's going to create 4 columns. And the reason is there's 4 of these FRs, and they're creating 1 fractional width each, which means 25% each in this case. This, I don't want to go too far into that because it's outside of the demo, basically. But this is a quick way to get CSS for this, and it'll repeat onto the next and do another row after you get more than 4. So you can kind of see, if you look at this, you can kind of see we've got an uploader, and then we've got a display started for that mood board. So we're on our way. We're doing pretty good. The next thing we'll do is create a data collection to store the mood board images. And so at this point, I'll mention in the post, you mentioned per user, like a user uploads and they see their own mood board. I'm going to skip that for now and at the end show how to add users on, because basically adding users, it creates new pages for all the flows of signing up, signing in. You have to do more things. I didn't want to include it in this demo, but once you do add that stuff, which I'll talk about at the end, all you're going to do is filter this grid by created by equals signed in user. And then that'll filter. So for this video, it's just going to be wide open. Anyone can click this. I mean, it's going to be just me with the test link, but anyone can click this upload and it'll upload to the board. Just wanted to mention that. So what we're going to do next is create a collection to store the images. And that's a data collection. So if I go over on the left side here to data collections, there's a default in here for users. And I'll mention really quickly, this interface is going to change with the next release. So depending on when you watch this video, this section might look a little different, but you're going to do the exact same thing. You're going to create a new collection. We'll call it mood board images. And then in this collection, depending on your application, you might have more fields, but I clicked on it and I'm going to click on fields. And I have a few default that come with Builder, with every collection, but I'm going to add a field for image, which is the actual image file that someone uploads. And that could be an audio file or a video file too. You'd have to like branch out and do a little more. In this quick demo, I'm just doing images only. So that's an image file. And then, you might have name, you might have other metadata, you might have something else. But the only thing I really need is order, because aside from what image to show, we're going to drag and drop reorder. So I want to store the order in a column. So I created a collection, mood board images. I have at minimum 1 field for image, 1 field for order. And you could have more, but that's all I need. So now that the collection's created, we can start using it. And what we'll do is when someone uploads, when someone clicks on this and changes it, we'll save to that collection. We'll save an image. And then we'll have this grid always displaying up-to-date images. And so to get this mood board this image uploader to save an image, we're going to create our first flow. So right now on the left, we've been looking at elements, but if you click up here on flows, this is where you do actions and get in the interactivity. And so there's a default autosave, page binding, and page load on every page. We're going to create a new flow. And this will be to add a mood board image. It'll be what happens when they click on this image uploader. So to add a mood board image, we're going to open this flow. We're going to add an action. And we'll just search for create. And then I'll see data create record. Because it's a builder data collection, I'm creating a record. So the first thing I'll do is select my collection. I'll select mood board images. And then it gives me the opportunity to map fields. So in this case, I want to map the image they just uploaded to that image field. And then I'll set an order of 0 to start. So the first thing is in this map fields section, I'm going to select the field image. And I'm going to get the image value for this new record from an element value on the current page. And I'm going to select the element image uploader. So this image uploader value will be the currently uploaded image, basically. So when the user clicks it, it'll show a preview in here after they upload. And then when we run this action, it'll take that value from there, which will be the image. So then I'll map another field here which I don't even know if I would have to do this, but I'm going to set order. And instead of from element value, I'm just going to do text. I'm going to set the order to 0. So now I have this flow, and I can trigger it on whatever I want that will create a new record from whatever's in this image upload field, save to the image field, and then an order field of 0. So that now that flow is created, I'm going to come to this element here. So if I go back to elements, this image uploader element, and we have properties, styling, events, and data. I'm going to go to events, and I'm going to set the change event. So if it's changed, and so if someone clicks on it and selects a file and it uploads, that triggers a change event in HTML. So on change, I'm going to add moodboard image. And so that right there will get us, that will add an image to the database. And in the future, when you have users, this is automatically going to add like a created by, basically, like an author. The person that uploaded it is going to be, their user ID is going to be stored alongside of it automatically. So when we go to filter by like my own moodboard images, the uploading part of that is already taken care of. So moodboard, we got the upload, we set it. The next thing is we want to display the uploaded images on this grid list. Because right now we could test this, but once we upload this image, we won't even be able to tell because nothing's showing what's in that collection. So the way we do that is we're going to come down to this grid list element. We're going to select it. And again, properties, styling, events, and data. We have these 4 tabs. We're going to select data for this one. We're going to bind data to this whole grid list table. And so what we're going to do is we're going to bind a collection list. You can bind a record value, which we're going to do in a second over here. But in this case, we're going to bind a whole collection to this grid. And what that's going to do is it's going to repeat, this grid is set to use this page over here. It's going to repeat this page for every record in that collection. So we go to collection list, we select the collection, moodboard images, we select get all fields so that we send all the fields into each page as variables. And then in this case, I want to sort it by order, so I'm going to add a sort right now. I'm going to do sort order ascending. And so now this grid list is bound to that collection, and it will show this image for any row that's in that database. It'll show this image that many times. But right now, if I ran it, it would only show this default image. So the next thing I'm going to do really quickly, before I test it and show it, is I'm going to bind this image in a very similar way. This image here, I'm going to select it. We go to the data tab. Instead of collection list like the whole grid list was, I'm going to bind it to a specific record value. So first I'm going to select from field because it's a collection field. I'm going to select the collection, and then I'm going to select the field image. And so it'll know what record, what row ID it is. It'll have the correct context because it's inside of this grid, but I just bound it to the image field. This image is bound to the image field. So now it'll repeat this page for every record in the database. And instead of this image, it'll show whatever is in the image field for each image. So hopefully that part makes some sense, but that's kind of how you link all this stuff up. And then, let's see, I can test now. One thing I'll do just to make a slightly better test is we're going to add a data listener. So the actual functionality is done. If we tested this now and I click this and upload an image, it would upload to this grid, but I would have to refresh the page in order to see it automatically in this grid. So the functionality would work, but the usability, the experience would be a little off still. So to fix that, we're going to do something called data listeners. And this is a really cool, bigger concept, but we're just going to focus it on what we need here. So on this page with the grid list, we're going to go up here. It says residence data listeners, and we're going to add a data listener. So it's also on page properties. We're going to add a new data listener. We're going to say action group to execute. We're going to run page binding. So the page binding for this whole page, if the moodboard images collection has something added or removed from it. So by setting up this listener, what this means is anytime the moodboard collection has a row added, if someone uploads an image, it's going to update. It's going to run page binding and update this page on anyone who has this page open in their browser. So when you're looking at it and you upload an image, you're going to see it update live. But in theory, if someone else were just looking at this mood board collection, they'd also see it update live. So data listeners are a really cool kind of like way to live update stuff. But in this case, we're using it just to refresh, just to make a better experience. So the only thing I'll explain further on this one is this page binding. The reason I'm running that page binding action on this data listener is because on every page, when the page loads, it runs page load, which by default only runs page binding. This data page bindings action goes into each element on the page, looks at this binding tab up here, and then binds the appropriate stuff. So now when something is added to that mood board images collection, it's going to run page binding. It's going to go in, it's going to know that this grid list is bound to this mood board images collection, and it's going to refresh it. So all that to set up so that we can test, and then we'll do drag and drop next. So I just clicked preview, and because I haven't previewed anything or set any URL routes up, it's asking me what's my home page. So I'm going to say mood board is my home page, and I'm going to open it. And so right now there are no images in that mood board collection, so this is correct. If I click on this upload field, and then looks like my computer's a little frozen. So I just paused that recording because that took a second, but then it worked. So I don't want to mess up this whole thing. I'm just going to show it again. So if I click and I choose a screenshot from my computer, it uploads it, and then it refreshes that grid. So it took a second. It's a little slow, but that happened. If I do this again, I'm just going to populate a couple. Oops. Weird images. This is like on my desktop right now. I wish I had something that was in a different color. There we go. Okay, so it's kind of hard to see because that one's small, but we'll do drag and drop and show in a second. So we got 4, the 5th one comes down, we have space in between. So you can kind of see what's going on. It's like there's a grid here. We're displaying the images that we upload. If we refresh, these are in a database, so they all stay like that. And so that's pretty good. And then the next step is we will drag and drop. So that's decent. Now if we come back here, drag and drop is kind of like a separate thing. So with drag and drop, you set up a bunch of actions on different elements, a bunch of triggers for like drag over, you make them drag targets, you make them droppable, and then you create custom actions that run when things are dropped, when things are starting to drag, that kind of thing. So it's very open-ended, it's very custom. It's cool because it allows you to do really custom things. In this case, it's like pretty standard behavior. What I'm basically going to do is I'm going to allow this. So if I come to this mood board image page, I'm going to allow this div to be draggable and droppable, which means you can drag it, but also if another one is dropped onto it, it'll trigger an action. So I'm on this div, and under the properties over here, there's a droppable and a draggable toggle. I'm just going to toggle them both to on. And so that right there will make them draggable, meaning like I can click and drag it, but it won't actually set anything else up. So I still need to set up other stuff, like some actions to run. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the actual actions up first, and then I'm going to bind them. So I don't want it to be too confusing, but I'm just going to set up the actions themselves and then explain how they fit into the flow. And hopefully afterwards it'll make sense. So I'm going to create a couple flows. I'm going to create a flow which is going to like set a state of when something starts to be dragged. When you click on an element and start dragging it, I'm going to do one that sets a state when another image is drug over this image, so I can change it visually so you can drop on it. I'm going to do an action to resave and reorder. That might be it. There might be one more, but I'm going to set all those actions up, and then I'm going to bind them so that like when you start, what's going to happen basically, I'll just explain the whole thing. When you start dragging one of these images, it's going to run an action that's going to set a variable on this parent page of what index of, what order number that image is in the whole grid. And then when you hover over an image while you're dragging, it'll add a class. It'll set that state like I just described. That's another action. But when you let go onto an image, it's going to run an action to reorder that grid and save it. And what it's going to do is it's going to look for the variable from this main page that we set when we started dragging. And then it's going to pull the variable from the thing that got dropped on. And it's going to run an action to reorder. So there's a lot going on. Seems complex, but it's actually fairly straightforward. It's as straightforward as it can be while still being versatile. So in order to do all these different things, I'm going to set up a bunch of actions first, like I mentioned. So I'm coming to this mood board image page. And I'm going to do an action for set state dragging. So this would run when it first starts dragging. One for set state stop dragging, basically. Do I even need set state? I don't know. Set state. I guess this would be drag over. And then set state drag leave. And I'm using terms that are kind of similar to HTML, but it doesn't really even matter what terms you use for these. But basically, when you start dragging, I'm going to set the state dragging. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to run an action where I set a variable on the parent page. So I'm on this mood board image. The parent page is this mood board page. I'm going to set a variable on that page. The variable name is going to be, let's see, dragging index, because that's the one we're dragging. And the variable itself, the value, is going to come from a sort of hidden variable called array index. And so in the grid, every page gets an array index. And it's actually, they don't necessarily, but there's this toggle here in the grid properties. There's a toggle for include array index. And if you do that, every row page is going to get a variable underscore array index, camel case, like a lowercase a, capital I. And that array index is the order that it's in. And so what I'm doing on this page is on this set state dragging, I'm setting a variable on the parent page that is the current array index. So whatever image I start dragging, I'm going to just store that as a variable in the parent page. And then what I'll do is, if I come to this, I'll take this div here, go to the events, and I'll tie an event. That was for drag start, basically. So if I search events and type drag, there's a bunch of drag ones I see. Drag start, we're going to run set state dragging. And basically what that's going to do is just set that variable. And then, let's see. So then I can actually set these, since I created these actions, we won't populate them yet. Let me set up all these events, because I feel like that would be more clear. Just trying to make this sort of as simple as possible. Once it's done, I feel like it'll make more sense than it might make now. Anyway, I came back to this div. I've got these events here. I'm on the events section. I just added that drag start. I'm just going to add a bunch now. So this same div is going to get a bunch of actions. It's going to do a bunch of things. It's going to act as something that starts dragging and something that gets dropped on. In a real world application, you might separate those two things out, or you might not. So in this case, I did a drag start, but let's do a drag over. So when I drag over, I'm going to run the action set state drag over, which is going to change the state so you can tell it's droppable. Then when you drag leave, when something that's dragging leaves that drop target, I'm going to set the state drag leave, which is going to remove whatever I added to make it look like you can drop it. And then one for drop. Might be a little bit frozen again. Drop. Actually, I'm going to make a new one for this. This would be reorder grid. And so on this div on drop, we reorder grid. Okay, so before I do the reorder grid, which is kind of the meat of this, I'm just going to do this extra confusing stuff in here, this drag over, drag leave. The reason I had to do that is because you need it visually. Like, you're going to need it, so I just did it. But basically what it is on this div, I'm going to create a class that is like the drop, when it's a drop zone. So I'm going to call it just active drop zone. And for now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say border, like 4 pixels dashed. So see how I got that border? When you're dragging something over it, it'll get this border. So it's a good way just to indicate. It's just like something you need to have. And so I just set that class up called active drop zone. Now I'm going to remove it because I don't need it there. What I need to do is go into the flows. I'm going to set the state drag over. So if something drags over, I'm going to add that class I just created. So I search the actions for add class and element add style class. The class to add is active drop zone, and the element to add it to is this div. And then set state drag leave, I'm going to remove that class. So I'm kind of just manually creating that visual cue. So element remove style class, I select active drop zone, and I select that element. And so I think now we can test this really quickly. It should show the dotted lines. They should go away when we leave. And technically it's going to set that variable. We're not going to see that. So if I come to here and I move it, yep. Okay. And when I let go, it actually doesn't remove because it never fires that drag leave event. We'll get to that quirk in a second. But that's pretty much working. So all I did there, the main part just now was the drag leave, drag over, was add and remove a class to make a visual cue. So I made these images get a border when something drags over them. Excuse me. And then the set state dragging was we set a variable in the parent page. Now we're going to use that variable. So now, spinning wheel. So now we're going to do this reorder grid action. So if I come into here, it's blank now. If I search grid in the actions, there's an action called grid move specific row to new position in grid/list. So I'm going to add that. And this has a couple settings. What the first setting is not as important at the direction, so whether I insert before or after. I'm just going to select before. The main part of this here is the row to move and the target row. And what this is looking for is that array index variable. So the row to move, remember when we started dragging, we set the array index of the one we're dragging as a parent variable. And so we can go to that parent, and dragging index is what I called it. So the row to move is going to be that array index. And then the target row, we can do, instead of coming from fields, we can come from variable, current page, array index, because each current page has its own array index. And so what we're going to do is we're firing this reorder grid flow when you drop it onto this drop zone. So when this image is acting as a drop zone and you drop another image onto it, it's going to insert that other image by finding that variable on the parent page before this current image. So that's a bit confusing, maybe, like it's some jumps and some variables, but really it's kind of straightforward once you wrap your head around the array index. That's how we're going to actually reorder. And so if I go to elements and click on this div here, oh, I think I already bound it, didn't I? Drop already reorders grid. So we're all set there. The last thing before I test, and then basically everything works. One thing is I'm going to trigger change event. So, well, before I say that, I'll explain what it is. The last thing to do is when we reorder the grid, if we stopped here, it would just reorder it visually. It wouldn't actually like save it in the database or do anything. It would just reorder it. So what we're going to do is when we reorder it through this action, grid move specific row to new position, The last input argument is a toggle trigger change event on the parent grid. We're going to select yes. So that means anytime we drag and drop reorder and it reorders them, it's going to trigger a change event on the parent grid. That by itself wouldn't do anything. But this parent grid, if we come to it and we go to the events tab here and we can set something to happen on this change event. And so this last step is important, but what we're going to do, we're going to set the change event to the built-in action called autosave, which means when this grid changes, it auto-saves. So we're going to change the order here. It's going to trigger the change event here, and then it's going to save that grid. The last step is in the grid properties. So that was events. We're going to go to properties. We need to tell it what field we want to use for order. Because we reordered it, and then we save, we trigger the change. It's going to save that order, but Builder needs to know what field you're saving your order number as. So the last thing on grid list, the last property here, field for order, we're going to select the collection first, which is just so we know what fields we can select. So we select mood board images and then order. Now, as long as that's selected, the auto save on change will always save the order. So I think that actually does it. I think that's everything. If I refresh this page, we'll see my images. Oh, I know there is one thing I forgot already. So if I take this one and I want to move it to here, and I drop it, it went before, went up here. It's kind of hard to see. Like if I did it here, it goes before. And so yellow's up here, that one's down here. Let's see if the order's saved. It did. So now the reorder is saving. The last thing I'll need to do is, if you notice, when I took this image and I drop it here, it never fires the drag leave event, so that the dashed border stays. Like if I drop here, it worked, it inserted it here, it saved, but that dashed border saved. But that's a quick fix. That's actually in the flow on this page, in the flow reorder grid. After we reorder it, it triggers the save. We can actually just nest that drag leave. I think I didn't need this one I created. So let me just delete that. So yeah, so that should be everything. Now, I'm gonna move this over. No more border. Okay, so that's the bulk of it. Like that's adding the images, saving them to a collection, drag and drop reordering. Hopefully that wasn't too confusing. Hopefully you can just watch it over. And there were a few parts where my computer froze, which was weird, but I'll try to cut those out. The next thing that I'll mention, so that's good for like a proof of concept. The next thing that I'll mention is with users, to restrict this to an actual user. Right now, if I were signed in as a user, it would already be tracking me that I uploaded these images. So that, like I mentioned earlier, the upload part you don't have to do much for. But when you add users, which I'll talk about how to add after this, but when you add users, basically you're going to come into this grid list. And originally, if you remember, we had the data bound to this collection list, moodboard images, get all fields. We ordered by order ascending. In here, there's a filter field, and you can actually go filter, keep it on and, field to filter, you want to do created by, which is one of the builder automatic fields. And then the value to filter with, if you select current record field value, current user, ID, that's how you filter by only. So if I did this and I were signed in looking at this, it would be only my images that I uploaded. So it's filter, keep it on and, created by, current record field value, current user ID. And the reason that works is because created by is the user ID of whoever uploaded that image. Created by is in every data collection. Every like row gets like created by. So you're just saying if created by equals the currently signed in user ID. But for now, I don't have users, so I'm going to remove that. And then to actually get users, the easiest, fastest way is if you come up to patterns here, there's a user authentication pattern right here. And there's the pattern itself, which you can import. It'll create all of the screens and all the actions you need to create users, sign people in, send them magic links, all those different things. There's also a video in there you can watch, and there's also a lesson. If you come to this question mark here, there's a lesson on user authentication. It's called Creating a Sign-Up Flow. So here we'll explain better in how to actually use that authentication pattern to create users. But once you create the users, you filter like I said, and then you're good. So sorry that was pretty long, but I tried to keep it as condensed as possible. And like I also mentioned before, if you want clarification on any of this stuff or have questions, just chat in there and I'll do more videos. Like, it's no problem at all. I love explaining this stuff. So yeah, hopefully that helped, and good luck building it.